Hello, Endersword here again, this time with a Gold League game. This one is based on the new ladder map, which is Newkirk District. We are going to be looking at the Protoss player Anuik here, and his opponent for today is going to be the physics-based Zerg MT Entropy, but we're going to be focusing on the Protoss for this. This is one of the new ladder maps, like I said. I haven't actually even hit this on the ladder myself yet, but I have hit it in the HOTS beta, so a little familiar with it, but not with just the old units to go by. So the three things that I'm going to look at today are, number one, the idea of placing buildings with some sort of plan. This will largely just be the beginning of the game. I don't expect people, obviously, to know where you're going to place your buildings way into the game, 20 minutes in, where you're going to put your fleet beacon or something like that. But you should have a general sense, even on a brand new map, what you want to be accomplishing with buildings, whether I want to be blocking off a certain area, whether I just want to be hiding things in a spot in my base that's either hard to see or hard for the enemy to get at, whether I want them in a placement that's going to allow me to expand faster, something like that. And we'll see as the game goes on, things like this, where there's a gap there that can't be blocked off by a single pylon. What are we really trying to accomplish with some of the building placements? Second thing that I'm going to look at is the idea that we should really expand by default, meaning that if there's no reason to not expand at that given time, then that's what you should be doing. If expanding is not going to get you killed, or if it's not going to cut off a really brutal timing attack that you could be doing instead, then you should be expanding. So if you could get it up, if you could get the expansion there and get it running and you can defend it, then you should basically do that, unless there's some distinct reason not to, that you're going to hit a very distinct timing that you want to hit and you can't expand. Or if you put it there, it's going to die. Other than that, you should be expanding by default. The third thing, which really dominates the end part of this game, and I'll tell you, this one will be a little bit of a snooze fest. There's not going to be a lot of attacking back and forth up till the end, but I think the end of this game really will spell a few things out and probably be something that you'll recognize in some of your own games as something that happens, where an army starts in, army absolutely wins a battle, but ultimately ends up losing the game for you just due to a lack of reinforcements or proper reinforcements coming into play. So as we get going here, we can see that, yeah, there's a kind of convoluted wall off here. It just took an extra amount of buildings to the point that by the time this wall off is actually viable and in place, it's almost too late for us to care about it. It's not really there until 3 minutes 30 seconds or so that this is even actually walled off. And at this late in the game, well, a few roaches could just come up and take that out. It's no longer defending against a Zergling rush into the base, but it's also not protecting an expansion out here or anything. Basically, it was really vulnerable during the time that if we were vulnerable and Lings did come across the map to try and kill us, then there wouldn't have been a way to stop them at that point in time. So ultimately, this doesn't really accomplish much of anything, and it goes up late enough that this could actually become an impediment later on. This won't be your main point of defense in another minute or two. You're going to want your main points of defense to be up here. This could actually prevent you from running back to your base in the event of a Nidus worm going up, or in the event of mutas coming. It's going to be hard to move your stalkers back and forth, especially if you don't have blink or anything yet. So in some ways, this wasn't helpful, and it could actually be an impediment later on in the game. This as well, the placement of it, not being central, these aren't going to help us really guard this ramp yet, so they're not setting up to allow us to take this expansion. I'd also point out that Anuik hasn't really scouted anything beyond this. He kind of scouted this pool was done, and I think lost his probe there to Lings, and we didn't see that these bases were actually going down. It's one thing if it dies, sure, that happens, but you want to be sending something out there to check. send another probe out, send a first stalker out, something that can go out and get a sense that these are going down. If you know that the 3 hatcheries are there, once again, even without this walled off, maybe we're good to expand on that, and we don't have to actually worry about overly defending ourselves or anything. This ultimately isn't doing much for us. It's not going to give us a lot of offensive capability. And then adding on a robo before actually putting this down here just isn't really going to work out in the long run. By the time it does go down, still these buildings aren't really in place. There's nothing preventing things from just swarming in the front here. The entire kind of game plan and how this progressed just made everything really late and makes these positions pretty indefensible, but also doesn't have a lot of offensive potential. And again, kind of building buildings back, making almost a concave with them, not really where you'd want to be. If you're going to try and make that wall off, you're kind of going to want to hold them on a ramp in an enclosed area where they're kind of fighting from the low ground, maybe don't have vision, easier to force field off, things like that work to your benefit. The robo facility, which seemed like such an important thing apparently to get down, did get that observer out, so luckily we'll now get to look around and see what expansions were taken, but then it hasn't actually been used since then. So again, why really rush to that technology if we're not going to get a lot of benefit out of it? Unless you're going to be kind of constantly using something or it's crucial to your plan, then that could have been something that we got later. Maybe just get a hallucination instead and just hallucinate a Phoenix to fly it over. Even just send a stalker over, send a probe over, take a peek at what's going on. You're still going to get intel. It wasn't worth it just to rush that single observer out and then kind of wait a minute and a half before even starting on this next Immortal. We're not getting a lot out of that, and we have had to delay this Nexus by a whole lot in order to accomplish that. Now the push out here again is done a little bit blindly. He does have the observer obviously going around seeing that, yeah, there's probably not a lot of units here. Well, no, of course not. The Zerg player was able to kind of see in the base the entire time. These overlords have come in and done a pretty good job scouting. He's got a good one position here, which is going to know whether or not the army moves out. Nothing that the Protoss player is doing here would make the Zerg believe that he has to build any units right now. And in the absence of you having to build any units, well, he's just going to start making these drones, even saving up larvae. He's got a lot of money here and a lot of larvae saved up. If an attack started to come, he could turn all 19 into roaches pretty much immediately. Now 27. In reality, he probably shouldn't have this much. I don't know whether he was just supply blocked there or not. Those should definitely be becoming drones, becoming units at this point. No reason to bank them up to this extent this early in the game, but it does give him the versatility just by happenstance that he could basically morph in an entire army, and there he ends up using a whole ton of that larva. And in this case, that's basically exactly what he's doing. I'm just going to morph in 20 roaches, and perfectly well defended. And he didn't have to worry about that. Knew that nothing was really coming across the map, and the moment that it does move out, this overlord spots everything. When you're moving out, or when you know that you're around that time, that you're going to be moving out and making an attack, yeah, he's ramping up his production, teching up at the same time, but not expanding behind this attack, and not really preparing for the attack itself. An observer didn't come with this army, so he didn't get another one of those out in order to kill the creep. And I'm just going to stop it right here to look at some of the lack of preparation that came with this attack. This army itself is actually pretty scary. It's a bunch of stalkers, bunch of zealots. Probably want a few more sentries in here given the type of army composition that this is. It's always good to have sentries against Zerg. You're really just going to control that landscape. And then obviously the Immortals in the back. The only units that he has seen are really the roaches, and that is the primary composition of the Zerg army here. But the major things missing here were the pre-scouting, to make sure that some things like this overlord were off the map so that he didn't immediately see it coming and have all that time to prepare. We didn't try and take any control of this watchtower, which is directly in the way. So again, another place that somebody could completely see you coming, get the jump on you. We had no idea how far the Zerg creep was. Knew that these expansions were up, but he just had no idea what's going around on the rest of the map. And for all he knows, the creep spread is like way out to here, and you really want to be bringing an observer with you along the way in order to clear that out, because you're not going to be want to be fighting on this creep. And even as we move in here, you don't want creep tumors ever to be behind where your army is. That just means that you're now not only fighting on creep, but you're retreating on creep, and you're just never going to make it in that type of case. But the number one thing that's missing from this is any sort of forward pylon outside of his own base. A single probe should have gone out with the army, ideally before the army, to start putting down a few pylons in locations around the map that are going to give you opportunities to reinforce with your army. And we'll see as I start this up again that that's ultimately what's going to happen to our Protoss player. Gets on creep. Of course, the Zerg, aware that this is coming the whole time, thought he'd go for a cute flank, but some pretty good force fields here are able to cut this Roach army completely in half. And he's going to destroy this Roach-based army, particularly what they cut in half. That's not going to stand up to Immortals. Unfortunate positioning here, and again, more sentries would have made it a lot more viable to continue to block these off. He does have actually a lot of energy left on these. Could have gotten out like 10 more force fields here to prevent these Lings from doing damage and preventing the Roaches from actually getting a surround on any of those Immortals. So the fight could have gone a lot better, but he still ultimately is going to win this fight, kill the initial, just absolutely brutalize the initial force, but reinforcements of Zerglings coming in came and ripped the army apart. Reinforcements of Roaches coming in. We've now seen essentially 3 mini waves of reinforcements come out from the Zerg player, basically a full batch from each of the hatcheries that's there. By the time these Zealots make it across the map, which were warped in at the point that the Lings came out, they were warped in back here at home. By the time they ever made it across the map, that's not the unit we wanted anymore. Now we want more Stalkers there. Now we want that Immortal to be across the map. But it didn't actually happen. He didn't target the rest of this down too. At the very least there, should have taken one more shot with everything at the hatchery to make sure he got that before doing that. Again, a bunch of Stalkers. Had they been there about 30-40 seconds ahead of that, this would be a totally different fight now. But now how do we deal with this? All of a sudden we're absolutely outnumbered. Nothing is where it's supposed to be, and this is just going to eventually push into our Protoss player. The Zerg does kind of take his sweet time with this. I would like to see him at least go to that third and make sure that he's denying that quickly. He doesn't really know that that's not fully up and running yet, or not populated with any sort of mining. He kind of had an idea when it went down, but doesn't know that it's not being used. Ultimately comes in here, gets his Ling, Roach, and Muta action. There's nothing he can do against this whole force, and pretty obvious that our Protoss player is going to have to tap out here. He's starting to run out of minerals himself, since he never did actually have that base up, and his main is starting to get depleted as well, already out of one mineral patch there. So I will just actually back up a second and just show the warp-in cycles, and then let's just imagine that that warp-in cycle had actually occurred at the battle as opposed to at home. This will probably be back a few minutes. Where was it at? Let's start us at about... No, that's already the reinforcement. I'll start at 12 because that's as close as it's going to let me go. But the important thing to watch during this did have a lot of gateways, and I do like the decision to throw a lot of these down before going so that they're up right around the time that he's going. Although I would question, maybe not, why not wait the 5 seconds that it took to get those up and then send those immediately with your army? Since you're kind of choosing that this is your timing attack, why not go with the maximum force that you could put out at the time? There's no reason to leave your own base with 700-800 resources left that you're not actually bringing with you, let alone ramping it up on a point that you're actually supply blocked. So the engagement goes down. We've already seen that. We know how that sort of thing happens. But as this is occurring, as we're fighting, I've got at least 8 gateways here, 9 gateways here at home that are not warping anything in. I'm not warping anything in at all. This is not rallied to the front. This is just rallied to the home base. I don't care what's happening over there right now, but I went through about 30-40 seconds there where nothing was warped in to continue this. As the zealots are warped in, well, I know why they were. That was warped in because those lings were there. At the time they were warped in, there were a bunch of lings. Well, that would be great if there's a pylon like right here, so that we could just back up to that pylon, warp in a bunch of zealots. They completely take care of the lings. We only lose one of those 3 immortals, and then I've still got the immortals there. But by the time they actually come in, oh, there's roaches. What have I warped in? Well, now I've warped in 4 stalkers. Again, this immortal is not being rallied to the front. I've got a whole bunch of extra warp gates that are available. It's not a lack of money. I could warp in like 5-6 more stalkers, warp in a few more sentries. I could be chrono boosting out these warp gates to make sure I get more. Could be chrono boosting out these immortals. You never want to be queuing up immortals like that, particularly when you are trying to get everything out onto the map as soon as possible. But again, with another round of stalkers, right around the time that there were like 8 roaches left and then 5-6 mutas coming out at the same time, if those stalkers were warped in here as opposed to here, then that would have been an absolutely huge thing, and we would have actually won that fight, and Protoss would now be walking through the enemy base as opposed to backing up into his own and ultimately losing this game. So that's one thing that really applies to all races. It's super obvious with Protoss because you can do the forward pylon and everything. If you don't have that there, you're walking across the map. But it does apply to Terrans and Zergs as well. You want to be resetting your rally points to where you want. You want to not forget to make things during that fight, and that's exactly what happened to our Protoss player. There's about 40 seconds there where he was just concentrating on that fight. And we have 9 warp gates at home that are not doing a damn thing. And even without the pylon up there, if he had made the zealots back then and then rallied them forward, they would have been there on time to deal with those zerglings when they came out, even without the forward pylon. So just do not focus exclusively on the battle. You're going to save 1 or 2 extra units by microing them around, or you could warp in 9 or 10 completely new ones and just bring them into the fight, and you're always going to be better off that way. Just bring in more stuff and macro a lot better, and it's going to work out for you in the long run. So thanks for watching, guys.